Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to part 2 of Who Wins the Thing. So today we've got Delita from FFT and Vyce from Tactics Ogre. Now, these are effectively, as the previous thing, cut from the same cloth. Effectively, they are the same character in two different settings, with Delita kind of being a combination of multiple Tactics Ogre characters, namely the multiple different versions of Vyce, combined with a bit of Lancelot Tartaros, along with his weird relationship with Kashra being rebranded into the slightly less weird relationship between him and Avelia, where it's a bit more mutual and a lot less stalkery. Anyways, with that being said, yeah, when it comes to FFT, Delita is just generally kind of the Batman of his particular universe, just sort of showing up, kicking ass, and then just leaving without any further questions. And then in Tor's case, Vyce is, well, the sort of fake best friend in the initial part of the story, only to then more or less be a weird foil to the main character, less as a direct foil and more so to try to get busy with the, well, female lead. Yeah, it's a bit of an odd time, all things considered with him, because, yeah, he definitely comes off as creepy and gets denied at every possible opportunity, but damn it, the man knows what he wants, and it is unfortunate for everyone on the continent. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this here. So, essentially on the left, with Delita, since he isn't technically normally playable, yes, he does have his word lines cutscenes, I prefer this little spinny gif to every single one of his little playable cutscenes, because those things kind of suck. But with that being said, he's going to be running his Arknight version, so that's going to be his end of the game version. However, for reasons that will become clear very quickly, we're actually going to be running his maxed out Rendezvous version from War of the Lions for this, because his main story version is going to need some help, weirdly enough. I know that the immediate assumption is like, yeah, Delita shows up, he kills everything in his way, how could that guy possibly have a problem? This is a... When I was saying that there's a lot of things to consider for this one, there's one particular comment that comes to mind from that poll, basically saying, oh yeah, Vyce would never win because he's a coward, he's not very honorable. My man, that's why he's got a shot. Like, this is not a fight you take fairly. The reason that Delita wins is because everyone takes him head on. If you fight a, rhinoceros head on, that's great. You shoot it from a helicopter with a rocket launcher, that's going to be a very different exchange there, So, anyways, let's go ahead and get into this here. So, let's go ahead and break down these different characters and what they bring to the table. So over in the left corner on Delita's side, he is running the Arknight. I have the Divine Knight brought up here because Arknight is basically it's just a rename. It's the Divine Knight for Delita. They reuse the Arknight 3 separate times. If you're wondering, wait, what about all of the samurai stuff and whatever else? Yes, but that's why we're using his other version, because effectively, when it comes to the Arknight, it's essentially just used multiple times in name, but in name only. The actual classes are different every time that it's reused, and his version is basically a retooled Divine Knight. It's literally the same thing with a different name. It's weird how they didn't bother, I don't know, just doing something more with it, but either way, his abilities are as follows. So he's got Crush Armor, Crush Helm, Crush Weapon, Crush Accessory, aka the Fuck Your Equipment combo, which is great if they can get close. Anyways, moving on though, the version that we're going to be using for the purpose of for most of our discussion here, and again, pardon the ads on the side, I'm just pulling up the wiki because I want to have the cool spinny gif, and I don't want to switch between all these different things. So we're going to be using his Rendezvous version. So this is going to be coming in at max level, comes in with a higher bravery, still has only mediocre faith, which actually just gives him, good resistance to spells, so he's not much of a spellcaster though. So he is locked in stats-wise, at least. Comes with Chaos Blade, Scooch into Grand Helm, Lordly Robe Ribbon, and yeah, for some reason he's able to equip head stuff in his accessory slot, but whatever, just roll with it. And he gets Holy Sword and Yaido commands, as well as Shiradori as Safeguard and Move 3. So effectively, this dude has got some serious movement. He's got some pretty solid range, and he's basically got physical evasion out the wazoo. So, fantastic. Back to spinning gift time. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and move over to Mr. Vyce. Pardon the cut. I just wanted to take a little bit of a quick second to go over and make sure that I got all of his passives and immunities and stuff like that jotted down. Okay, so with that being said, we've got Ranger Vyce. He's going to come in as a Ranger. If we want to make an argument later, we could also go ahead and throw him in as Buccaneer, since he gets unique access to that as well. Arguably, that would... I mean, honestly, now that I think about it, Buccaneer kind of just, like, instantly hard counters him to the most comical degree possible, so we'll get into that in the end. But Ranger Vyce, this is a class that's generally considered one of the most basic in Tactics Ogre Reborn. Effectively a guy that is an assassin for all intents and purposes, but somebody that is going to essentially, quote-unquote, be specializing in taking out individual targets, which is really about as vague as you can possibly get. Like, no kidding. I would assume every one of these classes would be capable of taking out individual targets. However, weapon access-wise, we're talking about fist weapons, daggers, swords, axes, bows, crossbows, and guns, specifically long arms only. We've got Constitution and MP boosts over here, pincer attack for being a helpful buddy, which is kind of funny considering he's, again, just kind of the solo guy. Steadfast in case you want to have the one archer capable of not getting shot off a cliff. Double attack for the sake of dual wielding. Lobber, resisting charm and petrify, of course. And then we've got recruit because plot reasons. First aid for getting rid of stop from enemy or from ally units, which is hilariously useless. And then we've got back attack. Now this is kind of funny because back attack in the context of Tactics Ogre is hilariously like one of those skills that has basically almost no use whatsoever, because evasion is kind of from all sides and accuracy is already pretty darn high, so in most situations there's absolutely zero reason to run it whatsoever. But in this case we have a skill slot that, functionally speaking, outdoes basically a huge amount of the threat that the final version of Delita actually poses, because it just avoids all evasion, because this causes all attacks to count as if they're hitting from the back, so evasion, go bye-bye. Constitution, because, you know, why not? He doesn't really have much else to do. Fusils, because we've got gun, and Lobber, because grenade. Okie dokie, so... that all being said, as far as movement is concerned, he has... actually, slight correction, I don't know if I'm going to cut this close enough here, but he actually does have... he will have standard movement, but due to have access to snipe gators, this puts his movement up to 6. Technically speaking, he can also swap out for teleportation or flight, but we'll get to that when we'll get to it if we need to. Now, the thing is, the reason that we're running the sort of rendezvous version of Delita here is because his base version stands absolutely no chance here, because if we're assuming the same rules that we assumed last time, they're starting on either end of the field, you know, they're going to have a couple of turns to set up, they encounter each other from the other end of the chessboard, and whatnot. Effectively, the only shot regular story Delita has whatsoever is if they start right next to each other. This guy outdoes him in terms of movement, even with the +1 movement that he gets from his class. He still outdoes him in terms of movement. In terms of range, his default guns here are going to have a 9-tile range. This isn't even an upgraded version here. His finishers with a multi-shot ability are going to have a 9-tile range, without any kind of protection or whatever else to deal with the crazy scaling these weapons get. Effectively, this guy is getting some really, really good damage. Like, when it comes to guns in Tor, if you don't have enough armor to withstand the shot, it's just ridiculous, is basically the general idea here. Like, when it comes to guns, they basically delete wizards outright, and so in this particular case, even without any, let's say, guaranteed criticals or guaranteed hits or whatever else, back attack in this particularly oddly specific context basically means that he is always going to hit anyway. And on top of that, we've got a multi-hit ability over here. Potentially, we actually might as well just swap him over to Wind, give him an additional 15% in that particular case. Like, he is potentially ludicrous in terms of his advantage in that particular situation. If he needed additional firepower, he could always use that earring in combination with his weapon skill to get past any remaining armor with a torrent shot that can't miss anyway. Like, ranged-wise, it's not even remotely close, and this isn't even trying. This is with just a long gun. This is assuming, again, like, if we wanted to get even more ridiculous with it, let's say we go ahead and... do we even want to just run Jiggly on him, maybe? Like, we technically have the option for running the Jiggly. We could run the Brimstone. I guess, in this case, Brimstone would probably make a bit more sense, because he's, you know, like, the guy's a human target, obviously. So, in this case, we run Brimstone. We go ahead and pop on a... go ahead and get a Stalker Earring. Who's got one of these right now? Okay, so we stick a stalker on him, so that's going to go ahead and put his weapon skills into the overclock range over here, so we're going up to 60 at this point. So now, due to the sort of limitations over on Delita there, we know that he's got no counter to Leaden, because most things there don't. As far as immunities go, he's going to be... His default state is still going to be able to be hit by a lot of debuffs. So, for example, stuff like shot, charm, or sorry, not shot, stop, as well as charm, as well as sleep. I don't know specifically the story version which things they're immune to, but I know at least some of those are going to be able to hit him. Like, it's not even a contest with that original story version. This thing's range is 8, but it's able to naturally fire up to 2 tiles beyond that range, up to 10. If he gets up to a higher elevation, like we go ahead and maybe swap this earring out, forget the whole shot strategy whatsoever, we go ahead and, let's say, give him, you know, some flight or warping capabilities. He goes and he flies up on top of anything, and we're already talking a case where he's like maybe running like 12-15 range on this longbow. Assuming it's not going and hitting him normally, like assuming it is able to hit him normally, rather, we're talking about normal damage multiplied by an additional up to 30% physical, up to 30% anti-person, up to 30% elemental, and this is an additional 10% on him matching the weapon's element. Like, this thing would basically shred him to pieces already. Again, this is assuming they don't have a hard defense value. If they do have a hard defense value, you've got the finishers, you've got the shots. Like, there's very little that story Delita could do to stop any of what this guy's doing. Because normally the assumption that comes to mind is like, oh, he's gonna do, like, swords, and he's gonna go dual wield, and he's gonna go 1v1 the guy, and then he's gonna break his swords and break his equipment. Yeah, no kidding. But at long range, like, Vyce, it's in the name, Ranger. Like, dude's got range for days. It's not even remotely close. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about the sort of rendezvous Delita, the real version, the one that's actually a bit of a threat here. So in this particular context, let's go ahead and pull up what he's running, just for the sake of going over it again, since he does actually cheat. We're going to use this cheat version. So again, he's going to be 99. He starts with 97 bravery and 96 faith. He's just barely able to not go and avoid himself. So Chaos Blade, so really high attack power if he does get close. Escutcheon 2 and for incredibly high evasion. Grand Helm, that's going to prevent blindness and sleep, although that's something the ribbon's going to do anyway. Lordly Robe, which is going to give him, I forget what does what, but he's got Protect, Shell, and Regen on at all times. He's got a ribbon in his accessory slot, even though it is a piece of headwear. Again, I don't whether that's a mix-up or an intentional cheat, who knows? But he's got the same Holy Sword. Actually, come to think of it, he's got Holy Sword rather than the Arknight stuff. So, effectively, this switches him over to the kind of Agrius skill set here. And yeah, we've got the Ido command, as well as Shiradori, Safeguard, and Move 3. So, he's going to make up for that movement. So, functionally speaking, they're give or take equal in terms of their movement, depending on how you want to count it. We'll get to that in a second. Immune to Chicken Toad, Charm, and Doom, which only one of those would really apply, and Ribbon already covers that anyway, so it's kind of interesting that they would have to bring that up. Anyway, so in this particular case, this hyper cheaty version, what does Ranger Vyce potentially have? Well, we're going to have to get a little bit trickier with it, since range-wise, effectively, he's going to either have to be really far away, or and potentially he's going to get run down if he's going for the far away strategy here. Additionally, it's worth noting that as far as, again, while their movement is relatively close, Delita would, in this case, potentially be getting a little bit closer over time, seeing as that movement range is going to be one higher than what he is currently working with, even with the Snipe Gators. What is worth noting, though, is that when it comes to the Ido commands, we're going to assume he's got infinite swords. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he's got infinite swords, because otherwise we would just have to account for things like, oh, he's only got one mass immune, he's got one use of haste and the thing explodes or something. We're going to assume that Safeguard works as it probably should have done the whole time and just protects his swords or something, okay? So we're just going to go ahead and leave it at that. Okay, so what kind of options do we potentially have on this guy over here? So we've got Fists potentially going for the Insta Punch here, because if he's running Holy Sword, do we assume once again that he's running a Divine Element? Maybe. we're going to assume he's a neutral element for the purposes of this thing, seeing as there really isn't anything that's going to very conveniently fit, seeing as, again, he's running a lot of different things. So daggers-wise could give us a little bit of extra speed. Swords might potentially give us a few better kind of passive options. Guns, I think are largely going to potentially still be an option. I'm going to say that there may be a worse option. Their basic attack with protect on at all times, we're going to count it as if they have, as if they potentially have kind of armor in this particular case, since again, it's anything that affects scaling that really causes these weapons to plink. Finishers, however, use a completely different formula. That's why, if you're wondering what the deal is with that, that's kind of, the general shtick. So, effectively, what we're seeing here is a situation where the basic attack on this thing would never want to be used. The recovery time would cause them to get run down on, and additionally, the finishers are going to be dramatically faster to go and implement. So he would, for all intents and purposes, have the option to just run away and keep scattershotting. Would this work? I mean, maybe. The thing is, he would have to, let's say potentially throw this out in favor of something like a warp ring. Okay, so let's say, or not a warp ring, but a flight ring. So it's funny because flight is effectively the warping of TO. So for those unfamiliar, basically in FFT, the way the warping rules work is that you have something like a 10% chance of failure for every tile beyond your movement range, but you can potentially catch up. It looks like in this case he's running move plus 3, so he will not be teleporting. So essentially height is going to be one potential massive advantage here. So if we go, let's say, put on a wing ring and we just find a high place to go up to, a lot of Delita's abilities over there are based off the fact that he's able to just kind of walk up to them. I don't see anything here that's noting that he has any ability to go up there, fly, anything along those lines. So essentially, if he ends up getting anywhere to the tune of, like, let's say three tiles worth of height, at that point, it's just a free win from a ranged perspective. Since again, a lot of his Holy Sword abilities and stuff like that will shut off after that range. Same thing with the Ido. I don't believe most of them have infinite range, so that would be a stop there. He would potentially be able to keep recovering, so at that point, it would just kind of come down to Vyce having the sort of DPS to potentially burn him down. Having to sacrifice that slot potentially for a wing ring could potentially be a problem in that regard, but he actually might be able to overcome this by, let's say, putting on some flight boots instead, which I really should have just unequipped everybody. This is why in earlier videos here I always used to unequip everyone. Here, let's go ahead and find somebody with some flight boots. I should have looked up who had it before doing all this. Where be you, flight boots? It's gonna be hilarious if this turns out to be like one item that I somehow don't have on the save file. Like, I do have flight boots somewhere, surely. Like, it's not even an uncommon item. I was gonna say, like, I know somebody's got to be running this. Okay, Warren and Ozma apparently have them on hand. Where are you way down in this crazy long party list? Thank you. I will go ahead and take that, and let's go back to Mr. Vyce. Okay. So in this particular case, he's sacrificing one movement, but he's exchanging this for the ability to fly. Now, why would Crest of Fire and Flight essentially make up for a lack of one tile of movement? Because of the speed difference rules between these two. If he moves and he takes no action, effectively he can, let's say, potentially manipulate the turn order to where he's like, let's say, moving 3 tiles, skipping his turn, and then additionally moving a second time immediately, because you can oftentimes get double turns on account of, well, not taking your full movement range. In TO, you're counted based on tiles moved. In FFT, you're counted on whether or not you moved and whether or not you acted. So one's granular, one's locked in. The interesting thing about this is that combining this with the Crest of Fire, this is one item that's going to reduce your overall weight and overall recovery time, so this means that he potentially could be going a lot faster, and at this point, he really might as well go for something along the lines of a bow. So if we go back to the bow example, who's got the jiggly at this point? Mr. Folk? Okay, so Folk, let's go ahead and get your thing taken off there. Go ahead and give him the jiggly set, just because I kind of want to throw this in here. So, Jiggly set. I would imagine even with Protect on, this probably would still be able to easily scale past that. So Jiglisset is essentially a gigantic bonus when it comes to your ranged offense if you happen to equip the entire set. It's like right here, his original hitting power with a gun was somewhere like 1400, and now it's all the way up to 1800. This scales freakishly high, but again, it's resisted heavily by armor. So something like Protect would potentially be able to take a huge chunk off that, but in this particular case, it might help a decent bit more. Now, the reason that this would be picked in particular would in this case be due to that whole range thing. It's hard to fire a gun downwards. It's easier to fire a bow downwards, and presumably if there's additional height or whatever else to be considered, then he might have an easier time getting around. Another thing that's worth considering here is going to be this little happy goober over here, once again with dark weight. Since verticality is Delita's big weakness in this particular case, if he lands a leaden on him, that prevents him from moving up or down anywhere, so potentially he could keep him locked in place from a distance. So whether or not we even need to consider something like the lobber here, he's going to have it on hand anyway because it's here, and at that point, he really might as well go full ham with this whole thing and throw on a couple of Dynast King's meads. Now, this is going to be particularly notable because, again, in TO, the difference here when it comes to the mead is that this is not just a kind of defense drop, as it were. It is a 50% multiplier on incoming damage. This thing already has some of the highest potential scaling of any weapon setup that there is in this particular setting, on top of an additional 50% on top of that, potentially also outspeeding, potentially also locking the guy in place, also just kind of cheesing from a distance. Now, is any of this shit honorable? God, no. But it is worth mentioning that when it comes to back attack, you might be saying, wait, if he's using his finishers, that's a completely different type of attack. Back attack is just for basic attacks, isn't it? No, back attack works for everything, even spells. So, in this particular case, it would basically bypass every part of his evasion because evasion doesn't work from the back in FFT. I love the fact that there's this one oddly specific thing that's totally worthless in one context and completely nullifies another. Oh man, I almost wonder if they meant that to be a mechanic and then they just couldn't get around to implementing it or something, because that is hilarious. So, as far as I'm concerned, even against the cheap version that potentially gets rid of almost every debuff with exception to Leaden, I feel like this still would end up having a pretty easy time of just outranging the guy. Again, he has to get close. If he gets close, yeah, no, Vyce is totally fucked in every possible regard. If he gets any attacks off whatsoever, like, that's the end. It's basically just like the whole Mountain versus Viper fight, except in this case he's got a shot because plot doesn't demand it. So, it's, on top of that, it's worth noting that as far as defense goes, he's not exactly too much of a slouch. He's actually pretty decently defensive, but when it comes to speed, range, and whatever else, I would say Vyce has a pretty distinct advantage here. One of the benefits of running a setup like this is it's relatively lightweight. Additionally, if any attacks were to land later down the road, he does have a decent amount of stuff with resistances, though again, that's easily torn apart if he does get close. If, for example, it was considered too dangerous of a thing to, let's say, if let's say Delita were to get close, he were to break any part of this equipment, the side effect would obviously go away. If he breaks the weapon, everything falls apart. So, again, assuming that there's any height whatsoever, Vyce easily wins that, as long as there's more than just, like, one tall tile in between, in which case it's an infinite stalemate, and like, what are you doing at that point? Which, actually, no, if it was a one-tile range, you actually could potentially overcome that, come to think of it. In that case, rather than doing something like this, he actually could go for one of the setups that's pretty useful in the post game, which is potentially to just run a different weapon loadout. So many finishers, I don't recall which axe ones may potentially have this off the top of my head, but many finishers in this particular context are actually going to have different availability in terms of their height and whatnot. So many of them do not check height whatsoever, and many of them would potentially be able to hit below. Actually, one thing that I know for sure is going to be swords. So essentially running sword and bow, he actually could go ahead and swap this out for, let's say, the Brenny. So let's say he goes and swaps this out for the Brenny. We'll go ahead and put this up here. This actually gives him a pretty significant stat advantage, too. So there we go. We'll go ahead and pop this sucker in right here. And he's still got pretty notable offense as far as range goes. And then, with those two on hand, potentially we swap out Lobber in this case. Do we want to necessarily swap it out or no? I think we're probably fine without it. But with these two over here, this means that he does have, at the very least, Cherry Ronde if he decides to be close. He's potentially got some of these other moves over here if he's a little bit further out. Essentially meaning that if Delita were to stay at exactly 2 tiles away, then there would still be a dead spot there. But it's also worth mentioning that because these finishers are faster, and Vyce can kind of build up a speed advantage by not moving in this case, theoretically, it also might be possible to move 1 tile, get one of these moves off, and still go back with enough time to spare. Especially if, let's say, he swaps out the Jiggies over here for... He should be able to equip Luminance. Okay, no, apparently he doesn't get Luminance, but he could still potentially go for some snipes over here. Might still improve things somewhat. So we've got there as well. We've got that there as well. And additionally, we've got Paralytic Wave, though I will mention one thing I didn't consider on the last disagreement video here, was that when it comes to Paralytic Wave, technically speaking, when it comes to magical defenses, it really should just be low faith stuff that requires concentration, which in this case would be him, so he wouldn't be able to hit with, Paralytic Wave. Anybody high faith would be very easily hit by debuffs, theoretically, so just kind of something to consider going forward. Not really relevant right now, but just something to think about going forward. So personally, that's how I think this would end up playing out. That Delita would keep trying to get close, Vyce would keep trying to hide, and as long as there's any verticality whatsoever, that gives him an option here. So what does he do if it's a completely flat place? Like, what if it's just completely flat, there's absolutely nowhere he can possibly go? He has to take this fight on directly. Well, in that particular case, his options are a lot more limited. Okay, so I kind of see 3 paths to success that actually still might give him a shot, and it's, functionally speaking, going to be looking at the final scene of Hot Shots in terms of him actually winning this, since obviously the second that he ends up getting close, he starts getting his equipment completely shredded to pieces, because again, that's what Delita does. He's basically a gigantic human slap chop. Now, that being said, this is okay, we're going to assume in the first case that he's running the equipment break set. For the second scenario, we're going to assume he's running his whole, Yido and Holy Sword thing. It's kind of what makes this a little bit weird. So, assuming that we're looking at a human slap chop setup and he has to take him on in a head-to-head and can't use his ranged options for some reason, he actually... Assuming we have those 2 tiles of range to set up, this actually isn't too unlikely to work. So he uses Lobber to put on a Haun's Tome for Fall Strike, as well as puts on a Dynastking's, I apologize. This was actually meant to be a Jewel the Avatar over here. He puts on a Jewel the Avatar for himself, puts on a Fall Strike on him, which already gives him 40% chance to dodge whatever abilities are coming in, at which point he collects a Magi card, a critical card, and goes and uses the Sylphide over on the Talons to essentially go for the sort of Hail Mary one-shot there. 2 wrinkles in this particular plan. First of all, if at least half of those attacks end up landing criticals, then that's just easy one-shot against even most bosses in this game. Now, granted, his intelligence kind of sucks, but we also know that there's not really any resistance on the FFT side outside of Faith. We know that Delita's Faith is kind of mediocre, so that all depends entirely on how that situation ends up scaling, right? So that's one potential option. However, the second potential option, I think, is a decent bit more interesting. In which case, we go for the, let's say we put the Brenny in one hand, we go ahead and put something like the Rune Axe in the other hand. And the reason that we do this is because while he can potentially break one weapon, he can't potentially break both. So effectively, what he does is that he tries to use his range to essentially retreat rather than getting close. So, essentially, he sets himself up with a Jewel. He throws the Tome at a distance, tries to get some range, and then attempts to throw the meat on there rather than attacking early on. Given that he's going to get eventually run down for the storybook version that has, that has the weapon break things and stuff like that, he would have the time to go set this up. So potentially he could just keep kiting using his entire item bar here. So this would mean 40% chance for those equipment breaks to miss. He sets himself up with a full MP bar. gets that 50% physical multiplier, and then essentially just kind of goes and wings it. If he dodges it, great. He's got 2 different weapons to potentially go and run something him down with. If one of his weapons breaks, he still has the other weapon skill set available, and in this particular case, he is basically dressed up as a stripper, along with the Crest of Fire, for both speed and a really high innate crit rate. In this case, if he goes and grabs a physical and a critical on his way up there, this would mean that any of these finishers would essentially be a 1 or 2 shot in most situations, presumably, versus even against tougher units and whatnot. So it's fairly safe to assume anywhere between, like 2 to 4 hits to go get that particular situation done. Again, remember, his story version of Delita doesn't bring any recovery with him. He's a really good offensive powerhouse. He doesn't have much in the way of actual support abilities. So we've got that going on there. And again, we're still running back attack here. So presumably at some point you pick up a skill card to make sure that that's always happening. Now we go ahead and talk about the version that, the cheat version. So the one that's going to be immune to debuffs, the one that's going to lose his equipment break in favor of having more debuffs available to him. Now, in this particular case, could he still take him? I mean, I honestly think this version without its equipment breaks loses a huge part of its advantage in this particular context, since on the TO side of things, they don't really have the means to go and stop equipment breaks outside of things like Evade or Ivory Tower. So, in this particular case, I would assume in a simple 1v1 sword duel, could he win? Potentially, but here's why. So, when it comes to Vyce's end of things, obviously he doesn't really have the means of going and stopping a lot of those debuffs. They're also fairly unlikely to land. However, between the two of them, again, I would assume that he would have a pretty notable speed advantage, given the context between the two of them. So, that being assumed, if their movement is the same, he might potentially get 1 extra turn where he's potentially running away for setup, but still, he could still do the old Haun's Tome and Jewel Avatar setup. Would he go for a mead? Maybe not necessarily. Remember that Storybook Vyce, or Rendezvous Delita. What the hell am I talking about? Brain is completely busted, sorry. Brain busted, who's this? Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and assume that he goes and attempts to get something like this going. So he gets his evasion, he gets the accuracy drop. One thing I do want to mention here, so the items that Delita carries specifically prevent blindness. But I was thinking about this in context to that first video. I don't think it makes sense for False Strike to be equated to blindness. The way that they kind of do their effect is entirely different. So in the case of blindness, it's affecting the eyes. In the case of False Strike, it is distinctly something that's more of a hand injury kind of situation. So like, it's available over on rapiers and cutlasses, essentially being implied as weapons that are useful for injuring the other person's hand, not their eyes. When it comes to like, let's say, getting False Strike from something like a dragon or whatnot, it's assumed that it's going and messing with the person's hands, not their eyes. So, either way, as far as that stuff is concerned, it does seem like that's sort of the way to sort of count this whole thing. So as far as I'm concerned, then False Strike would fall into that category of not having a direct counter. Anyway, so this would again guarantee that accuracy cannot go above 60% for their attacks for a decently long time. This would eventually wear off, but these fights typically are only going to last, a couple turns anyway, so it's kind of whatever. These things last like 6-7 turns, give or take. So the way that I would see this playing out is from a distance, he sets this up, he tries to, then depending on positioning, either sets up with a glass pumpkin or throws out a shot. The shot would presumably take off something like a quarter health at sort of its base value, since we're assuming he's going to pick up a physical and pick up 2 criticals. Now, the reason for this, or actually no, it would be physical, critical, and skill, since he's got 3 turns for setup here. So, reason for this is he kind of needs back attack to be able to hit whatsoever. So skill would be the first one that's picked up, critical would be the second, going from there. Now, poison, I believe, is blocked by the ribbon, so Vile Wound, while it wouldn't necessarily be useful for the purposes of necessarily, beating him outright through poison, something like Rending Gale does cost more, so he might potentially want to go for Vile Wound for the purpose of having a more kind of stable use of his MP. But either way, if he's got enough, he would end up going for Rending Gale, potentially going for that double crit. Now, as far as recovery goes, we know on Delita's side he's got access to regen and he's got access to the Ido abilities, so he could potentially heal himself for presumably like a third of his health at a time, give or take. Now, a critical build like this, I could see him getting run down. The thing is, if he's on the back foot, that's already it. Because he can't really out-heal too much and would essentially have to switch over to offense. Now, if he is going for more offense, if he lands a stop, then yeah, there's basically not much to be done about that at that point. But that's the thing. It's essentially, do you roll that 60... Do you take that 60%? Do you take those rookie shot odds? Or do you try to survive for another day and outlast the debuffs? That's kind of what we're looking at here. So something like Split Punch obviously would also go for that insta-kill thing, but again, the same accuracy issue comes into play. So ultimately, it's kind of luck being played on both ends. Between the two of them, I feel like this puts Vyce on the forward foot here, but only if the fight lasts a short time. Essentially, if it lasts more than a few turns and those debuffs wear off, no shot. He is instantly fucked right there because he's got nothing to stop the insta-kill, he's got nothing to stop any of the debuff sword abilities from hitting, and his recovery options are basically, like, he might as well swap the glass pumpkin out right now for something else, because his recovery options aren't great. And in fact, rather than anything else, in many cases, he might be better off just kind of retreating and hoping to do better another time, or rolling for a parry or something. Which actually, no, he won't be able to roll for a parry because he's running a counter weapon. So that's kind of how I see this playing out. I would assume that Vyce would be more likely to get the hand early on, but if anything lands on him, then that's likely going to be a bad time. He can tank the damage. It's the debuffs that he can't do anything about. With the Ido abilities, they're not avoidable, so he might not be able to stop any of those debuffs from happening. However, unavoidable attacks are still avoidable through this stuff over here. So this also kind of comes down to which mechanics are technically allowed to count, since we're sort of amalgamating everyone's mechanics at the same time. Because over on like on the Tactics Ogre side of things, even perfect attacks can oftentimes potentially be avoided through stuff like this. Technically speaking, in this case, he actually might be better off. Actually, no. Okay, so no. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to assume that Yidos are going to work like overheads from TOPSP, where they're just completely unblockable, uncounterable. They just are going to happen. We're going to count them as inevitably unavoidable, okay? For the purpose of making things simpler. I was going to say, if they count as a basic physical attack, then what if parries count? But we're going to just forget all that. We're going to assume that he has to switch over to his Yidos then, in which case, does he have options? I mean, technically, let's go take a look at that list real quick. Here, that yeah, it's a magic attack times their power, which, yeah, so the funny part is on that yeah, he gets the Lord Robe for getting additional magic attack and what have you, but overall, as I recall, I don't think he has much going on there. Anyway, so let's see. We've got Ashura, just kind of like a basic attack, Katetsu for the basic attack, those for getting rid of MP, which would actually be interestingly useful here, but I don't know how much it would actually scale up in this particular context, because if it's taking as little as it does in FFT, then it kind of would be a bit worthless here. But let's see, restoring HP, so that's going to be his one way of healing there outside of regen. We've got Protect and Shell, which he already has going on at all times anyway. Like, Muramasa is the one that seemed like it would be the most likely to be helpful there with Confusion and Doom. And then we've got Sanguine Blossom for doing just kind of basic damage there, and then Shirahiraden for doing its whole thing. Now, okay, so we've got a few different attack moves and whatever else. They all seem like pretty basic attack type of options. Now, here's what I'm thinking, though. All of this is all well and good, but this is assuming that Vyce is stuck to the Ranger. So the Ranger has this Hail Mary approach that could potentially have a decent chance of putting it in the, front foot there. And additionally, Ranger at a default completely steamrolls the story version of Delita there. But here's the interesting little rub on this whole thing. Say hello to the Buccaneer. So he's one of a few units that's got access to Buccaneer. Honestly, weapon can be anything in this particular context. We might as well just put on the Zolodil's Canine just because we want to flex at this point. So we're going to go ahead and put on basically whatever. Honestly, this could be anything. because, well, Delita can't do anything in either version against this guy at all. 2 skill cards, evade. This wins it every time. There's not even an option. We've got back attack, we've got evade. There is absolutely nothing Delita can do to this. Well, I guess technically we could... you know what? No. We put Speed Star... We put Speed Star over here. Go ahead and put back attack over here. We put evasion over here. And then there we go. From there we can just kind of put on whatever. Does he even need a weapon skill at this point? If we're just going to, like, tickle him to death with basically anything. I mean, do we just want to double attack just for the sake of why not? You know what? Okay. Let's get some of the shittiest weapons we can potentially put together here. You know, actually, let's just mess with them at this point. We get... like, 1 Fall Strike Cutlass, 1 Damask Sword. There we go. At this point, he's just straight up running debuff weapons. He's not even bothering with anything else. He doesn't even need healing. You know what? At this point, let's go ahead and swap this out with... he's just going to bring food, okay? He's just bringing food. He's just hungry. This is lunch for him. Okay. Now, why am I so confident that the Buccaneer just kind of wins this no questions asked? Okay. So, technically speaking, every one of those attacks are going to count as something, you know, directly, like an actual direct attack, as it were. Something more or less physical. Now, the reason I say that they count as physical is because we saw samurai abilities pop up in this context as well, and they, again, counted as a physical hit type of thing. So, essentially, in both of these contexts, what we have is a guy who's got the nullify automatic ability over here. So this is essentially going to be the next physical thing that happens whatsoever is just blocked by evade. And a lot of things that don't seem like they should be blocked by evade, like Speed Star, for example, giving you the haste ability. Haste is actually blocked by evade. That's why it was moved to the right side of the skill list, so that it triggers after Speed Star. So that he has a chance to haste himself. This is going to be extremely tedious to watch if it ever happens, because in this particular context, he's going to repeatedly get rid of his evade only to put it back on the off chance that he's hit, in which case he speeds up. Now, running debuff weapons just because it's kind of funny here, and bringing a snack because this is going to take a while. Effectively, all of his attacks are going to hit from the back no matter what, so he doesn't have to deal with the whole evasion thing. He is completely immune to basically everything Delita's got on hand. Assuming that... okay. This is also going to kind of come down to whether or not it technically counts for, like, if we have that situation where samurai abilities do potentially count as magic, we've also got Apostate on here, which renders him immune to up to 3 magic attacks, and that can stack. So now, at this point, like, all he has to do is just tickle him to death. He could basically come in with nothing. He could take off all of his gear, and he still would eventually win this. He is completely immune to everything Delita's got on hand. So there's that. This is one of those rare cases of a situation where a character is ridiculously good in one context, and like another character is kind of bad in another context, and this completely flips as soon as we put them against each other. So yeah. Go figure. Naked Buccaneer Vyce hard counters everything Delita's got on hand. How about that? So yeah, that's going to be more or less about that. And by the way, as far as like, one thing I do want to mention is like stuff like, I think it was Shell Bust, removing Protect and whatnot. In this particular context, the way I'm translating that is like, it would remove Fortify, but Evade is already just taking the hit in its entirety anyway. The interesting thing about stack shields over on the TO side of things is that some of them are going to be ones that have a limit on how many hits they can take, and others are just like anything that happens that turn is gone. So like Apostate is essentially going to be 3 effects that are magical of any variety that are going to bounce off. This is why summons are able to potentially burn through this. Something like Evade is just one physical action during a turn whatsoever, whatever it happens to be, it goes away. This is why, for example, if somebody has Evade up, you can actually go up to them, try to negotiate with them, like let's say if you have a lizard unit, you try to use coax on them, they actually can talk them out of using their Evade, and then you attack them. So, so yeah, it's kind of weird how those skills work. But anyways, that's all I had time for here today. I gotta get going. So I hope this was entertaining. Y'all have yourselves a good one. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.